Today we're going to be looking at one of the orchids in my collection, which is this Paphiopedilum Wardii. I've had this Paphiopedilum Warty Eye since the end of 2017. It was in bloom when I got it, and it had a second spike that bloomed shortly thereafter. But since then, I haven't quite been able to give it what it wants to come back into bloom until this year. Paphiopedilums are known for being a bit tricky that way, but it's okay, because it was really about me finding out what the orchid wanted, and the orchid was communicating it in the best ways that it had. And also, as you can see, this plant has absolutely gorgeous foliage, so even when she doesn't have any flowers growing, she's very striking. I wanted to talk a little about the anatomy of this orchid, because it's a bit unusual compared to many other orchids. As you see, it looks as though it's got one large petal at the top, two smaller petals coming down, and then this large slipper-shaped lip. And I'm not sure if you can really see into it, but the slipper is quite deep. So it's not very different from other orchids, but there are a few differences, and to understand them, you have to understand a bit about how orchid flowers generally appear. There are so many kinds of orchids that it's hard to generalize too much, but one thing that a lot of them have in common is that they appear to have 5 petals arranged in a star shape and with a big lip coming down at the bottom. You can see that even more clearly on this oncostelle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this big lip. Now, the secret of orchids is that those aren't actually all petals. What we're seeing here is 3 sepals, 1, 2, 3, and then 3 petals, 1, 2, 3, and the big petal is the labellum or lip. And then in the middle here, we have the column, which is where the reproductive parts of the plant are. So why are some of these things that look like petals, petals, and why are some sepals? Well, sepals, again, that's this one, and this one, are really a part of the outer bud structure that just opens and stays with the flower while it's open. So what you're actually seeing is a combination of the petals and reproductive parts of the flower and the remainder of its bud. I made a quick diagram of the difference between the two structures we looked at. On the left hand, you see a diagram showing the 3 sepals and the 2 petals and the lip or labellum, as we saw on the oncidiums. And then on the right, we see the difference in structure of our Paphiopedilum. So here what we're seeing is that there are 3 sepals, and there's the one pointing directly upwards, which is the dorsal sepal, and the 2 pointing down, which are the lateral sepals. And then we have the 2 petals and the labellum. And these, when the bud opens up, the sepals are the part of the bud that stays there forming a part of the flower, and then the petals and labellum sit in front of them, so the whole thing combines to make that star shape. But when we look at the Paphiopedilum, what we're seeing is that there is the same kind of dorsal sepal, but the 2 lateral sepals have been fused. And so rather than them pointing out into the sides, there's just one of them and it's pointing down. Okay, so as we were discussing, right at the top here we have the dorsal sepal, And then the petals, these beautiful hairy spotty petals, and then the labellum. But where's that fused lateral sepal? It's just hiding out around the back here. So you can see that that structure still exists, but it's fused together in a way that they aren't on other orchids. And because the labellum is the big slipper shape, it's really hard to see those lateral sepals. So I find this very interesting, and there are many other different forms of orchid that also have different sepal and petal structures. But this is the one that I have, and which I am so happy is in bloom again, and I'm so happy that I've been able to share a little time looking at the bloom with you.